If you are a student or a professional that would like to transition to a career in supply chain analytics and you need support to build your portfolio so you can showcase your capabilities and land your dream job or start a freelance career, you find the right video. Over the past 4 years, I've been sharing on my Medium blog and YouTube channel multiple case studies on how to use analytics to solve an operational problem, covering logistics, supply chain, and sustainability. Among the most frequent feedback that I receive and question when people contacted me, it's mainly on how I can build my own portfolio using the case studies that you've been sharing. So I will use this video to answer. I will just share my personal experience on how I learned analytics and how I used it to solve actual problems. So maybe for the context, I will share a bit about my background. So I started my career as a supply chain solution designer in a third-party logistics service provider. It's a logistic company that is managing warehousing and transportation for another company. So let's imagine, for instance, you are in Shanghai and you have a retailer like Costco that wants to set up a central warehouse. So they call multiple logistics companies and ask them to provide a solution. So the solution is taking in consideration the volumes that are provided by Costco. And then based on these volumes, different solution designers design the solution. So set up a warehouse with the layout, the number of operators needed, the equipment, and then they calculate the price. So analytics here is not really like the key point, because for most of the time, the data provided by the customer or like the prospect here in that case is extremely limited, and most of the time you have missing value, so you have to take assumptions. But what is important here is that part of the job of the solution designer is to calculate the price. So for instance, here, I took the example of the handling price. So let's imagine that you have the warehouse. Every time a store is ordering a box, the order is received by the warehouse, and an operator goes in the different racks to take the boxes, put that in a pallet, and load that in a truck that will deliver pallets in the store. Usually, the service provider, so the logistics companies, is invoicing by box. And this price is calculated by the solution designer. So for instance, here in that case, you can see that we are invoicing 1.25 euros per box. So most of the costs are coming from the workforce. And here, every time you hear workforce, it's maybe related to productivity. You have a bit of gross margin. Usually the gross margin for logistics companies is extremely low. When you quote, so based on assumptions, you are putting 30% of margin on sales. So margin is supposed to be 13% of the turnover. But most of the time, this margin is lower because the assumptions you took are wrong, because the customer didn't provide all the data. Then you have some fixed costs and some equipment. And the idea here is to understand that for each process, as a solution designer, I was seeing that from a cost point of view. So every time the customer was coming back to ask me for a cost reduction, I had to find a way to reduce it. And usually it's looking at the workforce. So you need to improve the productivity. And for that, you need to redesign the process. And how you redesign the process, you look at how things are done now, and then you simulate what would be an optimal solution. And this is where analytics was coming. Now that you have the context, I will maybe explain you, for instance, what kind of projects that I did. So usually what happens is that after I design the solution, you have multiple rounds, and let's imagine like a good scenario, you have been awarded with the business. So the business is awarded for most of the time only 3 years with a specific price that you have to follow. What happened is that after the operation started, you start to understand that the volumes provided by the customer are different, the logistics ratios are different. And what you have to understand is that this pricing are done using Excel with a very complicated quotation sheet. And for even very simple operations where you receive boxes, you put them on pallets, on racks, and then you pick boxes or you pick full pallets that you load in trucks, you can have up to 100 parameters. And maybe 60% of them are assumptions that you have to take. So you can imagine like the risk that these logistics companies are taking, because they are calculating a price that is based on assumption that may be wrong. And if the assumption is very wrong, you may lose a lot of money. And I've been some operations where we were doing minus 30% in terms of gross margin. So let's imagine that we won the business. Then what happens? At the end of the contract, or sometimes in the middle of the contract, the customer comes back and asks for a rebate or like a price correction or a price reduction. And this is where you have to find some optimization. So for instance, I gave you some examples. Let's come back here to our handling price of 125 per box, right? You cannot touch the margin because the margin is already very low. You have a pressure from the head office. So your job is to make sure that the margin doesn't change, at least in percentage. Then what you have to do is basically reduce the other items, right, in the cost. So for the workforce, you can optimize processes. And for instance, I shared some articles about picking route optimization. So the idea here is operators are walking in the different alleys to pick products. And when they walk, basically, it's taking time for them. So that's reducing their productivity. So if you optimize the path to minimize the distance per box picked, you are reducing the workforce cost. Then in terms of fixed cost, and you can have a look at the layout. Usually most of the time the fixed costs are related to the surface that is used. So you can find a way to optimize the layout to use less space and maybe also less shelves, less racks. So these are, you find the problem and how you search for a potential solution. So if I come back here, so I have prepared the different blocks to show you how to design an analytics product and how I did and how we did in the different companies we were working on, to show you then where your portfolio could be and why would you need a portfolio to showcase your experience. So here, the first thing is understand the problem. The problem that here I exposed was mainly related to cost, but for sometimes it can be performance or it can be visibility. So for instance, you have this article about product segmentation for retail. Here, the problem is not related to cost. It's more related to visibility. So a retail company or like a fashion company has thousands of references that they have to sell. And some of them are active, some of them are inactive, some of them are fast movers, some of them are slow movers. And for taking a decision for a business manager, it's very complicated because they cannot have an eye on every item. So they need a kind of visualization. So here, this solution, for instance, is implementing some data processing, data cleaning to create ABC charts, Pareto charts, to show key metrics that would help a decision maker to take a decision, but also inventory teams to manage the inventory. Let's assume that now you understood the problem. You clearly stated the problem and you show in your portfolio, it's very important that you spend the time to clearly state the problem. Now you need to find the root cause. Is there any method to find the root cause? Any perfect method? Of course not. There are many. But the most obvious one is to ask the operations, to conduct some interviews, to understand what parameters, what's changed in the operations, what changes led to the issue that you are facing now. You can also rely on the experience of operation directors that probably face the same issues in other operations. And you also have some statistical and mathematical approach to find the root cause. And I will show you that in the article, in my blog. So here you have multiple mathematical and statistical tools that can help you to find the root cause of a specific issue in a process. So for instance, here, the driver allocation problem is a factory that is delivered for the inbound, so I think it's raw materials, from two different routes. And the issues that they were facing is that from one of the routes, they have a kind of unbalanced driver allocation. So from one of the routes, they have difficulties to find drivers. And their assumption is that some drivers are refusing to take this route. I don't know the reason, maybe for profitability, maybe for time, weather, anyhow. The issue here is to make sure that this is the right root cause. So we can basically find a solution for that. And we use analytics for this. We use a statistical approach to find if it's statistically significant to say that the driver allocation, the unbalance, is due to the specific choices of some drivers. And if you go on the other articles, you will find multiple examples with actual case studies where statistics is used to find the root cause of a problem. But as I told you, mainly rely on interviews, on observations. So for instance, if I take the example of the picking productivity optimization, is just by going in the warehouse during peak times to observe the processes and the issues faced that you can find the root cause. Now, let's assume that you found the root cause, you understood the problem, you need to search for solutions. So where can you find solutions? Well, books, literature. So for me, the most inspiring books is the supply chain science. That's why, for instance, I called this channel the Supply Science. This is a book where you can find, I think, written by someone with a very mathematical approach of supply chain, where you can find multiple examples of algorithms, mathematical solutions that solve problems along the value chain. So from raw material extraction to manufacturing to last mile delivery. Or also use my blog where I'm sharing more than 50 different case studies where I explain clearly the problem, what is the root cause, and then you just have to adapt it to your problem if it's similar to what you're doing. Now that you have searched for a solution, how you adapt it for a prototype. Let's go. For instance, let's imagine that you have an issue with your warehouse picking productivity. So you found, well, randomly, like on my blog, that I did an article about that, right? And I shared some solutions on warehouse picking optimization. So you found a solution for a specific problem. Here, this solution is adapted to our operational case. So the mapping of the warehouse is based on an actual warehouse that we did. All the lines, they are dummy data, but they are dummy data coming from an actual data set. So you need to adapt it, but you have the core, you have the core structure of your solution. So for instance, in that case, what you can do is you can pull the code here, and then you can do some adaptation. So for instance, most of the time here, I explain how I built the tool and what you can do in terms of adaptation. So for instance, here, you should prepare all the lines data set with the picking location. So there is a specific workflow for that. You just have to fit with the template. I think at some case, you have to put the mapping for the warehouse location. So here, for instance, this layout is based on our layout, but you can easily adapt it. And I think it's in the tool, you have an Excel file where you can put a different coordinates. So you know that the issue is picking path optimization. You have a tool, you adapt the tool. So that's the sixth step. That's the third step. You search, you found a solution, then you need to prototype. So that's extremely key here, because before deploying a product, you need to show that you made the efforts to understand, to estimate if the solution is working. So for instance, when I was working as a data scientist in the digital transformation office of a large company, before productizing any analytics solution, we had to calculate a return on investment, because putting in production a model takes time and money, because you need to have an infrastructure, you need to have data engineers. So before productizing any solutions, you need to make sure that it's working and it will provide the savings or solving the problems that we're facing. So you can do that at your level for your portfolio by just taking a random sample set of data. So here you can take the data sets that I shared for the picking optimization, but you can also generate that, right? At the time I was creating this data set, it was 5 years ago. There was no ChatGPT. Now you can, with ChatGPT, you can generate a fake data set that you can use for the solution. And then you should calculate the savings that you have. And I think if you look at my article, it's what I did. Let me go quickly on it. Yeah, it's exactly here what I did. So I think here it's the total distance if you have one order per wave, and then I simulate by increasing the number of orders per wave. So here, when you are building your portfolio, you have your own data set. You test the solution on the initial case. Here, I would advise you to take a situation or a scenario that would be close to the reality, or even the worst case scenario if you want to show that your solution is working well. And then you would simulate for multiple scenarios to find the optimal one. After that, you can calculate a return on investment. And I would say at this stage, the solution is validated. The thing is, before putting it into your portfolio, you need to show that you have put some added value on it, because you cannot only copy something that was there and just duplicate it to your case. So for instance, you already did that by showing that you understood the problem, that you found the root cause, that you searched for solutions. But then you can improve it, right? So for instance, what is very interesting in this kind of solutions is the visualization. So here in my article, I took a very simple visualization that was based on one indicator. But you can put yourself in the shoes of the operation manager or the supply chain director that would implement this analytic solution and say, okay, based on the outputs that were generated by the solutions that I copied from the portfolio of Samir, what kind of additional indicators I can add, maybe how I could optimize better the solution. And here, that should be part of your portfolio. Just, you can say, okay, the initial solution that I took, for instance, was considering, clustering using SciPy, right? But the clustering approach was probably not adapted to the warehouse that I took, so I changed the methodology. You have the core, right? So here you just have to add added value. You don't start from a blank page. You have a kind of a structure, and then you can use your technical skills, your creativity to add added value. And this added value should be linked to the problem that you understood, to the root cause, and then you need to show return on investment. And then you have your business case. You can create articles. You can share that on GitHub. But what is important is that when you are showing that, for instance, to a potential hire manager or to customers that you want to have by doing freelance, you need to show that you have these 4 steps. So probably if you are starting coding, this project may be too complicated. So people would tell me sometimes, if you would start, learning analytics for supply chain, what you would do. So for that, I will go to the article, What is Supply Chain Analytics? So in this article, basically, I explain what are the different types of analytics. And I link that with problematics, issues that we face in supply chain. And it's a good way because if you're not familiar with this article, it links every type of analytics to a potential, to an article that you can find in my blog. So here, for instance, what I explained is that you have 4 types of analytics. You have the descriptive analytics, the diagnostic, the predictive, and the prescriptive. For most of the time, based on my experience working in large corporations, but also now as a startup founder working with my brother on implementing analytics solutions for small, medium, and large businesses, for most of the time, the problems that we are facing are on the descriptive side. What I mean by this is that before thinking about optimization with linear programming or non-linear programming or forecasting with machine learning or using AI agents for workflow automation, our customers are just facing issues to understand what they are doing currently, to understand their current business. So for that, they need good descriptive analytics. And this is where you can show some added value. It's, I would say, more in the data analyst side, but you can add advanced mathematical approach to it to increase the level, and then use the insights from the descriptive side to build predictive or prescriptive solution. What I would pick, for instance, this example. So when I started to, in Logic Green, we are implementing web applications that are based on the models that we have designed. And the first one that I did was related to ABC analysis because it's descriptive, right? And I was not super familiar with the deployment of analytics products like web application at that time. So the first project that I did is I took the code of this article and then I improved it and I created, if I go here, this module, apps.logicgreen.com. I think if you go supply chain optimization, ABC analysis here, ILNG analysis. And here, what you will see is this ABC chart that you saw in the article, a Pareto chart, an ABC XYZ. And it's pretty obvious. What I did here, I just copied and pasted the code that I generated for this article. I added insights. I added parameters. This is where I bring some added value. And that's why I encourage you to do with NAS visualization. And for most of the time, this has a wow effect to the recruiter or to the hire manager or to your potential customer if you want to be freelance. But it needs to be linked to a problem that is understood, a root cause that is found. And then you need to show that you took these visuals, these solutions, because they were linked to a business problem. And there you have an ROI, but here for the ABC analysis, I don't think there is return on investment, but it's more bringing visibility. I hope things were clear enough. So for me, yeah, what I would do as a next step, now that you watched the video, and if you are up to here, that means you are very motivated. I would go to the supply chain analytics cheat sheet that I've created, and I will check the different case studies. And for them, either I would look at my past experience and link a problem that we were facing, or or your customer was facing, or your supplier was facing, and try to link that to the solution. Then you can take a fake problem that you understood, but you need to show why this is the actual problem. And then you should provide prototype for your analytics product. And you need to show that the prototype is the right one because it provides return on investment, or it provides better visibility that is linked to a business problem. And this is where I think when you build your supply chain analytics workflow, you will bring added value, because that's what's happening with me. So when people are looking at the different examples, because I understood the problem in the right way and I found the right root cause, it links with the problem that we're facing. So that's why they want to work with me. If you have any question, or if you need support on a project that you are working on in your analytics portfolio, feel free to use the comment section, and we can use that as a forum to share together. And if I see a very interesting analytics portfolio, maybe I will have a look at it and share that in the next video.